Fantastic. Well, let's start a little bit with what space got to do with it and some of the lessons I've learned during my journey. Now, I like to say that my journey has 4 chapters. And so you're meeting me today. I'm the CEO and founder of SB Global, but this is just the 4th chapter of an amazing career. And so you have to understand that as you go through your journey, you will have ups and downs and transitions, and that's all part of life and having a wonderful career. So the first chapter of my journey is I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force right out of high school. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my career. I didn't have college money, and I really wanted to see the world. And in the 1980s, the best way to do that was to enlist in the U.S. Air Force. So I joined the Air Force. I was stationed in Turkey and Germany. I got a career profession. I was a personnel specialist, so HR, human resources. And I was an enlisted airman at this time, and I did that for 12 years, getting stationed in Turkey and Germany and Colorado. But during that time, I was able to use a program called tuition assistance that helped me go to school at night and on the weekends and complete both my college requirements, both a bachelor's and a master's degree, which allowed me to apply to become an officer in the Air Force. And so when I became an officer in the Air Force, I started that next chapter of my journey, which was becoming a space acquisition or space procurement officer. And that started my 25-year career in the space industry. And I did that. And I retired out of the Air Force after 29 full years. So 12 years as an enlisted airman and then an officer. And I was a procurement officer. So I worked on satellites and ground stations and rockets. I also taught at Defense Acquisition University. I taught about space acquisition and project management. And then I worked on the U.S. Capitol Hill, securing the budget for the Air Force, really understanding policy and legislation and how that senior leader, strategic leader, in the government really sets the course and the direction for an industry. After 29 years in the Air Force, I retired. And as I said, I started that next chapter of my journey, being the chief operating officer at Space Foundation, which was fabulous. Space Foundation is a U.S. nonprofit that does business internationally. And I was able to lead an incredible team, bringing those leadership skills I'd learned in the military into the corporate world. I also was able to look at that commercial side of the space industry. I had done a lot of military space with ground stations and rockets and satellites, and I'd done some things with NASA, that civil side. But leaving the military and joining Space Foundation really allowed me to see the commercialization side of space and the wonderful opportunities that are there, as well as creating new products, programs, and services. You know, when you're in the military, you get a budget from the government and you execute that budget. It's very different than when you go to the corporate world and you have to generate revenue to pay salaries. So it was a really good learning experience. And I did that for 9 years. And after 9 years, I really realized that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I left Space Foundation in 2024 and started my own company. And that's where you're meeting me today as the CEO and founder of SB Global LLC. And my goal is to be the bridge from the space industry to the general public and share how space is for all of us and how you can find your way into the space industry. And one of the things I did last year in 2024, when I left Space Foundation, was write my book, What Space Got to Do with It: 10 Life Lessons for Personal Growth. And I wrote this book because I'd been a mentor for many years, and I had people say, do you have this written down? Do you have a book? Or I might give a talk about the space industry and people would ask the same question. Where can I find more information? Do you have a book? So that was one of my first goals, was to write a book about the space industry. But more important, write something that could help everyone find their path, whether it's in the space industry or not. So in those 10 chapters, I share my journey, but I also interviewed over 200 global thought leaders before I started writing the book. And in the book are insights from 30 of those global thought leaders. Some of them are in the space industry, some are not, some are in policy making. They're from all regions of the world: India, New Zealand, South America, North America, Europe, Asia. They're from all over the world. So what you're getting is insights not only from my space background, but from global thought leaders that share that these lessons learned can help anyone no matter where they are in their journey. And so we'll go through a couple of the lessons today on International Women's Day, and you're welcome to add comments in the chat. I want to welcome Sheena, who's from Delhi. So thank you for joining. I know it's evening for you, so thank you for joining me on your Saturday evening. I'm so excited to meet you. Well, that first chapter is about seizing every opportunity. You know, sometimes opportunities come along as work. They look like work. They might be volunteering or filling in skill sets or giving up free time to do things. And one of those opportunities I took advantage of was what I shared with you. During that first chapter of my journey, right out of high school, I went into the Air Force, but I was able to use that tuition assistance to help pay for me to go to college at night and on the weekends. And so, yes, while my colleagues and peers were out having fun, maybe in the evenings or on weekends, and I was going to school or doing homework and turning in papers and getting ready for talks. But after doing that, by getting my degrees, I was then able to apply to become an officer. So that hard work was one of those opportunities I took advantage of, and it paid off for me to apply to become an officer. And I interviewed again 3 people in this chapter that relate to this. You know, I have Dr. Chidima Iroka, who's from Nigeria Space Agency. I have Antonio Stark from Korea. And then I have Her Excellency Dr. Rosalia Arteaga, who's the first woman president of Ecuador. And I interviewed all of them to get their perspective of taking advantage of opportunities. And the one I'll share with you during our talk today is from Dr. Iroka, Chidima. What she shared is you have to grab any opportunity that comes along, even if it's not paid work. You know, sometimes volunteer work may not be seen in the same quality as paid work, but sometimes when you volunteer, you're able to maybe fill in some gaps or areas on your resume that allow you to fill things in. So an example is I had a woman who was in the oil and gas industry. She was an executive leader and she wanted to transition into the space industry. Now, she was mid-career. She was already a senior executive in oil and gas, but coming into the space industry, you know, it's different people, different acronyms. We use a lot of alphabet soup, I call it, with acronyms, getting to understand the culture of the space industry. And so one of the first things she did is she volunteered for a nonprofit. Again, she was a senior executive, but taking on a role as volunteering allowed her to interact with other leaders in the space industry. She was able to go to conferences, meet people, and eventually she has become a chief operating officer at a space company. And again, it all started with her volunteering. And again, she was mid-career, a senior executive. So no matter where you are in your journey, you could probably find a nonprofit, whether it's the Mars Society, Space Generation Advisory Council. There are many wonderful organizations where you can maybe learn leadership or network into an industry or find opportunities in that industry. And that's one way of finding your way is by volunteering or taking advantage of those opportunities. So I took advantage of tuition assistance. I've also volunteered for many things. And as Dr. Iroka highlights, you know, grab those opportunities when they come along. And I share from Richard Branson, you know, if someone offers you an amazing opportunity, but you're not sure you can do it, say yes, then learn how to do it. You can learn by asking people questions. You can Google search things. You can ask Chat GPT. You can do research. So one of the things I shared from Dr. Iroka that she did is at the Nigerian Space Agency, she was asked to write articles, and she may have not been an expert or an author, but you know, she did the research and she wrote those articles. So again, take advantage of those opportunities. Say yes, figure it out. That next step in my journey that I want to highlight or lesson learned is defy gravity. You know, you have to try anyways, even when the odds are against you. So one of my examples is when I was an enlisted airman, I told you I became an officer in the Air Force, but the first time I applied to become an officer, I was not selected. So I could have just said, well, I wasn't selected. And I knew going into the application process, the odds of being selected were pretty slim. And the reason is, although I was in the military, and that is a traditional way of coming into the space industry through the military, I was also non-traditional space because most space professionals up until that time frame were STEM professionals, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And both my undergraduate as well as my master's degree are in business. So I'm that new wave of space professional that's very entrepreneurial and that commercial side of return on investment and creating a business and how do you find marketing and resources. And so at that time, the Air Force wasn't really looking for those business degrees. So my odds of being selected were pretty slim, but I tried anyways. I defied gravity and I was not selected. And so what was going to be plan B or plan C? So you always have to think that way. You always have maybe the first choice, but you should always be thinking of if this doesn't happen, what's plan B? What's plan C? What's plan D? Always be thinking and navigating what's the next step in case something doesn't happen the first time. So what happened with my application to become an officer in the Air Force is they told me that my application that was turned down would automatically meet another review board, whether I did anything or not. And I realized if my first application was turned down, the next one was probably going to be turned down too. And that could have been okay. But instead, what I did is I updated that application. I rewrote my essay. I got new letters of recommendation. I resubmitted that application. And on the second time, I was selected to become an officer in the Air Force. So what this shares with you is don't think of it as failure. Think of it as FAIL. First attempt in learning. I learned how to reposition myself in that application to secure the next opportunity. So try anyways. Don't give up. Even if the odds are against you, give it a shot. You want to know if there's a possibility. And the three individuals I interviewed for that chapter in the book are Dr. Priscilla Nowajewski from Chile, Ben Haldeman, who you may have heard of recently. He is the CEO of LifeShip that just landed some things on the moon with the recent landing on the moon. So he's a startup CEO entrepreneur in the space industry. And then Sejal Budhalia, who you also may know, she's from India, and I met her through Space Generation Advisory Council, as well as the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs Space for Women program. The person I'm going to give an example of is Dr. Priscilla. So Dr. Priscilla, she's from Chile, and she got a degree. As you can see, she has a planetary scientist and atmospheric dynamic expert. Well, first of all, that's not the first career field she started in. She started in a different career field, and she started in a different PhD program. And during the course of this PhD program, she just felt like it wasn't the right fit. But she'd already invested money and time, and she was already on a pathway to getting that PhD, but she just knew it wasn't the right way. So after volunteering for some organizations, remember volunteering through the Mars Society Chile, she realized she wanted to get a different degree. And so she walked away from the one PhD program and started that one in planetary scientist. Now, the other challenge she had was there were no careers in Chile for somebody with that degree. So talk about trying anyways. In one course, leaving that course, starting a new path, and there's no careers in your country for that specialty. But she tried anyways and she moved on. And now she works as a data analyst at ALMA Observatory in Chile. So an amazing example of try something. If it's not the right fit, like her first PhD program, it's okay to stop. It's okay to know that's not for you. You can make a change. You can pivot, try something else, find something that feels right for you. And again, find those organizations. I listed several. The United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, Space for Women, but they have a Space for Youth and Space for Water, Space and Lawyers. So there's lots of opportunities with UNUSA. There's lots of opportunities with the Mars Society. That's how Priscilla found her way into the right path in the space industry, as well as Space Generation Advisory Council. And here's a great example of somebody who tried anyways, even when the odds were against him. It's astronaut Jose Hernandez. He applied 12 times to become an astronaut. 12 years, 12 applications, 11 rejections. But what he did is he looked at every rejection as an opportunity of what are they looking for in astronauts and what do I need to do to become an astronaut. And there's a movie out about this as well as his book. So you can learn more about his experience of trying anyways. And on that 12th application, he was selected to become an astronaut for NASA. So an exciting experience. And again, try anyways, even when the odds are against you. That third lesson of my journey is embrace the uncharted cosmos. You know, um, conquering the fear of the unknown. We're very afraid of the unknown, and even I am. And so one of those things that I share was the unknown. Remember, I shared I'd been in the Air Force as an enlisted airman for 12 years in personnel, human resources. Well, when I was selected to become an officer, that's the career field I wanted to be selected as, a human resources officer. Those are the people I knew. I was networked into that community. I've been doing it for 12 years, but that's not what the Air Force wanted me to do. The Air Force needed me to be a space acquisition or procurement officer. Even today, most people don't even know what that is. And I assure you, 25 years ago, I did not know what it was, nor did most of my mentors. I didn't want to do it. So I asked all my mentors to call people at the Air Force Resource Center and Personnel Center, which is located in San Antonio in the United States, to ask them to reclassify me from space acquisition to personnel. And after about 2 weeks of this advocacy that people were doing on my behalf to get me reclassified, what happened was someone from that Air Force Personnel Center called me and said, Sergeant Brunswick, the Air Force really needs you to be a space acquisition officer. So when you're in the military, they're not really asking you, they're telling you. So you salute smartly and you say, yes, sir, and you move forward. And I'm so grateful because had I stuck in my comfort zone, we wouldn't be here today because I went to become a space professional. I would have been in personnel. I'm sure it would have been a wonderful and amazing career, and I'd be doing something equally fantastic. But instead, I'm in the space industry and I'm with you today. And I'm so grateful that the Air Force made that decision for me. Sometimes you may not have others that make that decision for you. So don't fear the unknown. Three examples of this that I want to share with you is Michelle DeValley, who leads a fintech company out of New York. I have Roger Spitz, who's a futurist. Um, and then I have Stella Lupashore, who originally is from Russia, which became Moldova, and now she lives in the US. And by the way, Roger was originally from South Africa and now lives in the US. And Michelle lived in Texas, what some people think is a different country, which, by the way, at one time Texas was its own country, but is actually part of the United States now. But she lives in New York. The person I'm going to talk about Don't Fear the Unknown is Roger. He has an amazing book that's come out and he has a lot of workbooks. Again, he's a futurist and he talks about the future strategies, but his book, Disrupt with Impact. And as he said, uncertainty is an inherent trait of the future. And what I always say is the only certainty is uncertainty. We don't know what the future holds. That's why I tell you, and I said earlier, you have plan A, but you might need plan B and plan C and plan D and plan E because things change and they pivot, and you need to be flexible and resilient and go with that flow. I'm just going to look. Hi, Lynn, thank you. Happy Women's Day. Sheena, thank you. Um, I love how you enjoyed the response, FAIL. So keep putting your comments in the chat. I'll read those out, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. So this is International Women's Day, so I hope you enjoy this slide from our Pulitzer Prize winning historian who says, well-behaved women rarely make history. And that's for anyone. Whenever you lean outside your comfort zone and you try different things, sometimes you'll be successful, sometimes you'll have that first attempt in learning that fail, but rarely do you make history in your comfort zone. The people who usually make history are those who are the disruptors, who lean outside their comfort zone, who break barriers, who try new things, who bring people along with them, who keep reaching up and pulling people along with them. So, for all of those who are women joining us, make history. And even for the men, take the women out. Well-behaved people rarely make history. So, that fourth lesson learned we have is beyond the desk, expanding your horizon. So in this example, this is chapter 4 of my journey. I had been a space acquisition officer for several years, and I had just recently been reassigned to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And I'd only been there about 4 or 5 months, and I was learning my job and I was doing things. Well, one evening, an organization, again, those nonprofit organizations, Air Force Association, was holding an event to support the Air Force acquisition workforce, and they were inviting everybody to come to an evening reception. Well, I kept asking everybody in my office, are you going to this reception? Are you going to this reception? Are you going to this reception? No, everybody was going to go home. And I was like, well, do I go home? Do I go to this reception? But you know what? It's more than just being proficient in your job and going to your job and leaving and going to your job and going home. It's also about building those relationships and getting out from behind your desk. So that's what I did. I went to the reception. And again, I'd only been at the Pentagon 5 months. So I didn't know a lot of people that were in the Air Force acquisition, because in the Pentagon, you all kind of have your different offices and, you don't always network and mingle. So, but I did go around the room and I did say hello to people. So again, networking isn't about talking to everybody in the room. Start small. Maybe you can talk with one person or a second person. So I talked to the people I know. But lo and behold, there was somebody I knew because about 5 months earlier, my boss's boss's boss, that we call a senior executive in the military, so they're a civilian, but they're equivalent of a general officer. He was there. And several months earlier, I had volunteered. Remember what I said about volunteering? Volunteering can open new opportunities and create things. I had volunteered to fill in as his executive assistant. His executive officer was going on vacation for 2 weeks, and I said, I'll fill in for 2 weeks. Now, this may sound like a pleasant thing, but for those of you in the military, I know we have a few military folks joining us. Volunteering to be an executive officer for a general equivalent officer is working half days, 12 hours. So you're there before that senior executive comes in, you get the whole day prepped. You're there about 6 a.m. and you're there after they leave, wrapping up anything, and you're there until after 6 p.m. So it's at a minimum a 12-hour day. But what it did give me the opportunity, one, I got to hear the senior executive, this general officer equivalent. I got to understand how he thought, his strategy, his philosophy. He actually talked to me and his deputy, who was also a general officer equivalent, he was also a senior executive. I got to listen to them talk and gain insight about their strategic thinking, where they thought things were going, how they wanted to position the organization. And during one of those talks, that senior executive asked me, Brunswick, what do you want to do? And you better have an answer. My answer was, I want your job, sir. And he laughed and thought that was great. So that happened. He knew me, that senior executive knew me. Here we are 5 months later. There he is in the room at this reception. I walk up to him. Hi, sir. How are you? It's good to see you. Brunswick, what have you been doing? Sir, I'm waiting for you to move me to a new opportunity. I asked for what I want. He knew that I was hungry, that I wanted that next step. And the person he was talking to was a gentleman that worked for him that filled a position for him on Capitol Hill as a legislative liaison. And that gentleman was telling him that he had a new assignment and he was leaving, and the senior executive needed to find a replacement. Guess what happened? The senior executive looked at him, looked at me, looked at him, looked at me. Brunswick, how would you like to be a legislative liaison? Now, again, he didn't give me the job, but what he gave me was an opportunity to interview. And I asked that person who was leaving the job, could I meet with him? Could I learn how to interview? And that person did meet with me, gave me great insights, and I prepared for that interview and I knocked it out of the park and I got the job. And that opened the door for a 5-year career working on the U.S. Capitol Hill as a legislative liaison. Again, it all started 5 months earlier when I had volunteered to be that executive officer and work those half days, remember 12 hours. And then I got up from behind my desk. I went to that reception, and there was that person saying, I'm leaving. Sir, you need to find a replacement. And I interviewed and got the job. So again, having a job is more than just 9 to 5, going to your desk and leaving. It's about volunteering for hard projects. It's about getting up from behind your desk and networking with your industry and your peers and your boss's boss's boss. And I do know we're running out of time, so I'm going to wrap this one up. Um, Some of the people I interviewed for this one are Monique Moreau, who's a AI and cryptocurrency expert. We also have Ku Wang, who is not only a co-founder of the Carmen project, but their fellowship is open this year. So I wanted to share that with the audience. The Carmen Fellowship is open right now. They're taking applications until 31 March. So if you're interested, check it out, see if you meet the requirements. And the third person is Brian um, Talibi, who's the CEO of Ahura AI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the slides and come back so that we can wrap things up. I know we only have a few minutes left. So if you're interested in learning more, one, you can go to Amazon, check out and get the book. I also, on my YouTube, Shelli Brunswick, you can Google Shelli Brunswick YouTube. I've created a webinar series about the book where the individuals that I interviewed for the book, we did some webinars. So it doesn't tell you everything that's in the book, but it gives you a taste about each of those experts and some of their insights. And those webinars are free. They're right on Shelli Brunswick YouTube. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. I post all the events and speaking events that I do, as well as you can follow me. And of course, there's shellybrunswick.com. So I'm looking at the chat. I know we only have a few more minutes. Anybody else who has any questions or any insight? And again, thank you for joining me on a Saturday evening. I hope you all had a wonderful International Women's Day because together we can make the world what we want it to be. So any last questions? Lynn, I see we're wrapping up. Well, I will wrap it up there and say, I'm Shelli Brunswick, and until next time, I look forward to seeing you around the galaxy.
Great talk, Shelli.
Thank you. You can all email me, so reach out, and I look forward to continuing the discussion because, again, the sky is not the limit. There are no limits. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shelly. It was a lovely talk. And people can connect with Shelly on the group as well. She's there. And if Shelly, if you want to share your email or LinkedIn on the group also, so they can connect with you on LinkedIn as well. That's also a possibility.
Absolutely, Lynn. I will put my LinkedIn on there as well. And I look forward to keep connecting. And thank you again so much for joining me. Thank you for your questions and your feedback. Have a good evening, no matter where you are in the world, or a good morning. It's morning time here in the beautiful Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Until next time, see you around the galaxy.
Thank you, Shelly. Great chat. Thank you.